this evening we're continuing our study of questions that you guys have proposed to me, and I hope that we're all getting a good opportunity to get to know what very specifically it is that, what the answers are that the Lord is giving to us. The question in particular that we're taking a look at currently is that if God is all good and all powerful, why do bad things happen? And it's a good question. If you are in the habit of talking with people who are not Christians or not religious, this is a question that you're probably going to run across fairly frequently, I think. It ends up being a question that a lot of people do ask. We've taken a look at some of the answers because it's not just a single answer that answers this question, but there's actually a number. The question, can come in a lot of different forms, by the way. Why doesn't he heal my parent or my spouse or my child? Or why doesn't he keep them from death? Or why doesn't God answer my prayers? Or why do wars happen? Or why doesn't God stop children from starving? Or why didn't God stop Hitler or Hamas or Stalin or whatever else? Why does he allow persecution? The question comes in a lot of different forms. But we've already taken a look at a few answers. We have noted that God is indeed good and all-powerful, but his nature is not just, like monolithic. It's not just one answer that we're looking at here, but there's actually his nature includes a lot of different things like justice and patience and wisdom. And sometimes good ends up maybe being supplanted or at least trumped by sometimes justice. A good God is also going to be a just God, right? Which means that sometimes bad people are going to receive the punishment that they rightly deserve. God is also wise. And we have in fact, we'll get to it in just a moment, but sometimes it is that God, in his great wisdom, as a father might have toward his children, decides that he needs to strengthen us in some form or fashion. And unfortunately, the only way that sometimes we are strengthened happens to be by means of exercising particular virtues. Patience is always the one we always like to point out. Right? There's only one way to gain patience, and that's to be tried. So we also make note of the fact that God has decided not to take back his great gift of the free will that we have and the choices that we can make. We often choose poorly with sin, and as a consequence, we end up hurting ourselves and other people. We do a great deal of harm to the world around us. There's all kinds of arguments a lot of times about, the victimless crimes or whatever. I'm here to tell you that there is no such thing as a victimless crime. You are going to be hurting yourself or someone else by the immoral things, the sinful things that we end up doing. We also pointed out, however, beyond all of that, that we do happen to live in a fallen world. And among many of the things that go along with living in a fallen world are things like death and sickness and suffering and all those sorts of things. And who do we have to thank for that? Ourselves. That's who we have to thank for it. Adam and Eve messed up in the garden, and since then the world has never been the same. When God made the world originally, he took a look at it and said, "That's good." Then men came along, and here we go. Things got messed up. It's really, after it's all said and done, many of the things that happened and many of the downsides of living in this world, the sickness and the death and the suffering and so forth, end up being our own fault. Sometimes, however, as I've mentioned before, sometimes it's for the purpose of discipline, strength, wisdom, maturity, virtue, and that kind of thing. It is important to understand that God sometimes does allow bad things to happen in our lives so that we might be strengthened, or perhaps in some cases so that he can see, like, whose side are we on, really, after it's all said and done. Yes?
You know, one thing that, when I hear discipline, I always think of it from a negative aspect. I was disciplined as a child. But when I think about it from a spiritual aspect, I welcome it.
Yeah.
Because the more God disciplines me, the closer I get to being a good and faithful and obedient servant.
Right. It is important to understand the differentiation between punishment and discipline. There is a difference between those two. We have the tendency to kind of get them conflated or mixed up together, but they're actually different. A good father is not punishing his child necessarily by telling him to go out and mow the lawn, even if it's a hot day, because there's things to be learned from having a good work ethic. There's lots of things to be learned by sometimes the things that our parents tell us to do, and that we as children go, I don't wanna, and nevertheless, it's something good for us. Y'all?
Well, I think in another way, being a Christian is a path we are following. Christ is a high priest. He's been through everything that we are looking up to. However, whatever comes in our way, it's faith that we are using. Without faith, we can never please God. So whatever comes in my way, is it good? Is it bad? It's what I have to follow. That is the moment I'm supposed to glorify God, for that is what He has made for that day for me. It might not be good for my interest, but that is just like you said, that's what God has made. The day that we go through, that's what God has made. That is what? Enjoy in it and glorify Him. So, in my way, if we say, if God is all good, that is a wrong thing to say right there to me. That you will say, if God is all good. That means you don't really have the faith in Him, because He has always been good. Is it good? Is it bad? Give thanks unto Him. That is what the Bible tells me to do. So,
Well, and
that is how I will go.
That's very true. In fact, the Scripture tells us every good and perfect gift comes from where? From God, from above. I did want to, however, kind of on this last, not the very last one there, but the next last one. Because someone mentioned to me the other day, because as we were talking about these things last week, I mentioned that sometimes it might be worthwhile when bad things do happen to us that perhaps we give thought to, is God trying to teach me something here? And I still think that that's absolutely true. But on the other hand, I think it's worthwhile not to necessarily, if you know what I mean, obsess about it. Because let's be honest about it. Sometimes bad things happen to us because someone is just being sinful. And let's also be honest about it. I'm going to die one of these days. And it's not because I have some lesson learned. It's just that that's the way of this world. And so forth. So sometimes it is that when bad things do happen, it is worthwhile wondering, okay, is there a lesson I can get out of this? But if there doesn't seem to be a lesson that we need to be getting out of it, then maybe it's just worthwhile also to pass on and just say, okay, this was one of those things that maybe falls into one of the other categories. Instead of wondering, did I do something wrong? Because actually, as we're about to get into the very last thing here tonight, the Job answer, this is something of a question that Job and his friends were sometimes asking. If you mess up a little bit, is God going to come down on you like a hammer? Boom. And that's kind of the question that Job's friends, at least, are trying to convince him is really going on, when the truth is that's not what was happening at all. With all that in mind, let's take a look at the Job answer, as it were. Let's turn over to the book of Job. It's a great book, but sometimes, especially once you get past about chapter 3, 4, 5, sometimes it kind of get lost a little bit in some of the poetry. But it's got a wonderful, heavy, heavy, heavy message that's very much worth our thinking. Just a sort of review. What's happening here in Job is that it talks about, it introduces us to a fellow by the name of Job who lives in the land of Uz. We don't know exactly where Uz is, but there is an Uz that is mentioned among in the region of Edom, which is east of the Dead Sea. And that's possibly where it is. We know that he was also considered to be a son of the East, which means that he was probably a nomadic tribe of some variety or the other that lived somewhere on the east side of the River Jordan. That's very likely what we're talking about here. He is a historical figure. I think that's worthwhile knowing. But he's a very rich man. He has a lot of children. He has possibly more possessions than anybody else. But he's also a very righteous man. It notes here in verse 5, when the days of feasting had completed their cycle, Job would sin and consecrate them, speaking of his children, rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them all his children. For Job said, perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. And then verse 6 changes scenes just a little bit. And one of the wonderful things I like about Job is that Job gives you there's only a couple of places in Scripture where if you know what I mean, the curtain gets drawn back and you get an opportunity to see what's going on in the spirit world. Notice what it says here, verse 6. Now there's a day when the sons of God, and what would they be talking about with the sons of God? See a lot of frowning like you're thinking really hard. The phrase sons of God are not making reference to like the Son of God, which is making reference to Christ. But the phrase sons of God is usually making reference very specifically to the angels, to the spirit beings apart from God himself. So it says there was a day when the sons of God, the angels, came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. Does that happen? Can Satan come up in God's court, as it were? And with evil. Yeah. Well, it's also interesting. If you take a look at 1 Kings chapter 22, one of the things that you notice there is that there's a similar scene that happens to be happening here, where you end up with God and the angelic host is before him. And the scripture says there were some on the right and some on the left. What might that indicate? The guys on the left are probably going to be the bad guys. The guys on the right, probably the good guys. And it is that God ends up saying to them, I have a desire to destroy Ahab because Ahab, and I'm paraphrasing here, because Ahab has been so evil, I need to destroy him. And one of those, apparently on the left, says, I will go and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of his prophets and tell him that it's A-okay for him to go to war against the Arameans. And he will die. And God says, okay, you're allowed to do that. Here in a similar sort of way, in the book of Job, we end up seeing Satan coming into the presence of God. And it's kind of interesting because the Lord goes on to say, where do you come? From where do you come? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth and walking about around on it. So he's all over the place, right? The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Then, and this, by the way, is a key verse to the book of Job. Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? What does that mean? Does Job fear God for nothing?
Because he's been given so much, blessed so much.
Yeah. After a fashion, he's saying, you know what? In fact, going and reading it on, he says, have you not made a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, he will surely curse you to your face. What's Satan accusing him of? What's Satan accusing Job of?
He doesn't fear him because he loves him. He's blessed by him so much.
Yeah, and very specifically, Satan is accusing Job of being kind of a mercenary. He's only good because you blessed him like crazy, you know. But if you were to take away any of those blessings, he'd curse you to your face. He's only in it for the blessings. That's the only reason he's being good. You take away that stuff, you'd be history in his book. That's that. Does Job fear God for nothing? He's saying, of course he fears you. Of course he worships you. Look at what you've done for him. He has every reason in the world to worship you, but if you take away all the stuff he's got, and is that like a legitimate kind of accusation that could be made towards some people? Are there mercenaries among the religious? Sometimes we take it for granted. How about these guys that are these health and wealth gospel guys? Give me your $1,000 pledge and God will bless you with 10 times as much. Right? So what are people doing when they give the $1,000 pledge?
They're expecting 10,000.
Exactly. They're doing something righteous because they think, oh, this is a good payback. There's mercenaries among the religious. And that's really what Satan is saying. Of course. But you know, if he were a poor man, he wouldn't fear you at all. He wouldn't worship you at all. He wouldn't be good. You just take away all the stuff. So God is essentially, in verse 9, says what? Do it. Everything that he has is in your hands. Just don't touch him. And so these horrible disasters follow in verse 13 and following. All of his wealth is destroyed in a moment. All of his children are killed in a moment. Everything he has is just like that. In fact, man, you boy, talk about having a really bad day. Okay? Notice it says in verse 14, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, blah, 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 they were destroyed. Verse 16, while he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God came from heaven. While he was, verse 18, still speaking, another came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in the oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness. All these things just happened, one messenger on top of another. Bang, 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 bang. And suddenly, Job, instead of being the richest man in the area, Job had nothing. Had nothing. And Job, verse 20 says, the scripture says, Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and did what? And worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. But then, chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan said, from roaming here and there on the earth. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil, and he still holds fast his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. Satan answers the Lord and says, skin for skin. Yes, all the man has, he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh. He will curse you to your face. What's Satan saying now?
He's saying Job doesn't really love him.
Yeah, that's really what he's saying. And he's saying, okay, so I took away all of his stuff, but skin for skin. You know what? What he's trying to say here is that a person desires life and health. You take that away from him, he'll curse you to your face. So God says, okay, tell you what, I'll prove my cause to you. He does love me. You can touch him, but you can't kill him. And so the scripture says that Job was given diseases by Satan. Specifically what? Boils from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. Now, I can never tell you I've ever had a boil, so I don't know how much it hurts. But folks I've talked to have had boils, they say it hurts pretty good. And he didn't just have one. He had them from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. And the scripture says that he just, he was scraping his sores. That had to have hurt to begin with. And maybe that was better than what was going on otherwise. I don't know. In fact, his wife comes to him in verse 9 and says, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Let me give you a clue. Curse God and die. Curse God, surely he will kill you, and then it'll be all over for you. That's all. But he said to her, verse 10, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. What does that mean? Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity?
Except the good and bad.
Yeah. Y'all?
See, I look at it this way. The wife and Job talking, all that we have read together has become Job and the wife talking right now.
Uh-huh.
So the wife being Satan, Job being the good one, standing in for God. So you see the question, how the wife put it to Job, curse God and all will be over.
Right.
And then Job told her that why should he do so? Would he not take the bad ones and the cat, whatever that he said?
Yeah.
So he just put it back to Satan. What you told God, that's not what it is. If he gives me good things, bad things come. I still worship him.
Yeah, exactly. Job didn't lose his integrity. He still ends up worshiping God. But that's not the end of his troubles, is it? What happens next? He's got friends. In quotation marks. With friends like that, who needs enemies, right? Now, to their credit, it does say, verse 12, when they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices and wept. Each of them tore their robe. They threw dust on their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for how long? 7 days and 7 nights, and never even said a word, because they saw his pain was really great. By the way, just in case you ever wonder about what to say at a funeral, sometimes silence is okay. But Job then ends up opening up his mouth, and he starts talking about verse 3, chapter 3, verse 3, let the day perish on which I was born, the night which said a boy is conceived. May that day be darkness, let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. What's he saying? Wish I'd never been born. Here's a man who's really, really, really miserable. So his friends try to help him out. And basically, what is the message that his friends end up giving him? Which becomes pretty pertinent to our question here. If God's all good and all powerful, why do bad things happen?
Just fess up and get it over with.
Yeah.
What sin do you have in your heart?
Yeah, what sin do you have? And why were they saying something like that? What sin have you committed? Why were they saying that?
Because of the bad things.
This was a belief,
Yeah, I think that was the.
even in Jesus' day, that if something bad happened to somebody, like the man that was born blind, or, that was a result, tit for tat.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of a karma kind of a thing. You know, you do bad stuff, bad things come your way. That's kind of what it was about. Boy, it's a good thing we don't have that kind of stuff going around today, right? Do people still believe that? They absolutely do. They absolutely do. What's one of the first things that sometimes people, especially worldly people, even people who don't even believe in God, or at least they say they don't, when something bad happens, the first thing that happens is they look to the sky and maybe hold their hands up and say, "What did I do wrong?" That's what they always say. Why are they saying that?
To get God's permission.
Because they see this idea of there's a direct relationship to doing bad stuff and having bad stuff happen to you. That's their idea. But what does the book of Job basically end up teaching us?
Be faithful unto death.
Well, there is that. Tralitha?
Sometimes God allows hardships to come our way because he knows we're strong enough to deal with it, and it makes our faith stronger.
Yeah. And one of the primary lessons really here is that this whole equation of bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people is not a good equation. It's not a valid equation. Sometimes bad things happen to very good people. And sometimes, because Job talks about it, sometimes very good things happen to awful people. So the equation of bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people is simply not a good equation to make. That's one of the main lessons here. But then after his friends end up telling him he's all wrong, and Job keeps saying, "No, what did I do wrong?" In fact, there's a whole section, a whole chapter where he says, "You know, if I have even not given help to an orphan, if I've ever lied to someone, if I've ever done this and that," and he just has this whole long list, may my life be barren. But I know I haven't. I haven't done that stuff. And he even goes so far as to say, "Lord, can I have a hearing? I'd like to go to the appeals court here. I think that there may have been a mistake that's being..." Does that sound kind of audacious? Sure does to me. It's almost kind of calling God on the carpet. "Lord, I think you made a mistake here." Yes.
Going back to what you said about what is the point of the book of Job,
Uh-huh.
what is it?
We're going to get to that in just a second. One of the major lessons, however, is that there are some bad equations going around, and that's a very important lesson to know. But the other one starts about chapter, I believe, 39 or 40. Take a look at Job 39. 38, excuse me. Job 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without what? Without knowledge. Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." And this isn't the only bunch of questions he asks, which is why it is that sometimes you've heard me talk about how it is that God decides to give Job the God test. Essentially, what he ends up saying, and obviously I'm paraphrasing. There's a whole lot of wonderful poetry here. There's a lot of very deep thoughts here, things that you can read there that kind of make you go, because they're just kind of heavy. But just trying to kind of paraphrase things, God is saying after a fashion, look, Job, you're not a stupid man. But after it's all said and done, you're not God. I would be happy to answer your question. You're asking a good question. God, hasn't a mistake been made? I'm here to tell you, God says, that a mistake hasn't been made. And I'd be happy to explain all this stuff to you. But first, you need to pass the God test. Then I'll know that you really understand what I'm about to say. So, where were you when the foundation of the earth was laid? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, verse 5, since you know, or stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth it went out from the womb? Look down to verse 12. Have you ever in your life commanded the morning? No? You may not be up to the God test. Have you, verse 16, ever entered the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? You know, for you were born then, right? And the number of your days is great. Is God being a little sarcastic? No, a little bit. Can you, verse 31, bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? What's he saying there? Who controls the constellations? I've made it so they don't move. And by the way, if I wanted to, I could loose the cords of Orion so they would move around. I could. Can you? No? Oh. And he goes on like this. Several chapters, actually. Chapter 40. Then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer. Even twice, and I will add nothing more. What's he saying?
He's saying, I've discovered that I didn't know.
I spoke when I should have shut up. That's what happened here. Sorry, God. I've overstepped my bounds. I know that now. But God, just to make the point, continues on. Verse 2, now gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with eminence and dignity, and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Pour out the overflowings of your anger, and look on everyone who is proud and make him low. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust. Bind them in the hidden place. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. You can't do that, in other words. Behold now, Behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold how his strength is in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. He's probably, by the way, talking about a dinosaur here. Didn't know if you knew that or not. That's likely what he's talking about. He even talks about a fellow by the name of Leviathan a little bit later on, right? Which is likely also a seagoing dinosaur. But the reason he's bringing these guys up is why? They are huge and untamable by man's standards. I could go down a rabbit hole on this one, but I'm not going to. Job, chapter 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I've declared what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes. The point of Job, very simply, boils down to this. Job, you are a perfectly intelligent fellow, but you don't know enough for me to completely explain to you why I do what I do. Why are bad things happening to me, God? Well, it could be this, and it could be that, and it could be this, and it could be that, but it might be this thing out here that we can't even imagine. You know what I'm trying to say, after a fashion? We can certainly put our finger maybe on a few reasons why, which is kind of what we've done in answering this question. We might be able to put our finger on a few things, like we live in a fallen world. God has chosen not to take away our free will, and the other things that we mentioned. But after it's all said and done, we may not really ever know why it is that God has done things that He's done. Now, I have a hope. The Bible doesn't say it's going to happen necessarily, but I have a hope that maybe when we get to heaven, we might be able to ask God, God, when this happened over here, that was so painful. Why did you allow that to happen? And if God, in His great compassion, decides to answer my question, I have a hunch, better than a hunch. I'm certain I will fall down prostrate before Him and praise His wisdom, because I didn't even know what was going on. Have we ever experienced anything like that in our own lives in a practical way? Remember growing up and having mom or dad say no to something? And, oh, we stomped our feet. And oh, we whined, and you don't love me anymore. And why are you doing this to me? And this isn't fair. And I'll go tell mom if you're doing that to me, or I'll go tell dad. As if that were some sort of an appeals court, right? I will, this isn't fair, and we cry and we wail and we weep and so on and so forth, but now that we're older, we look back on that stuff, and do we understand a few things more now? We certainly do. We understand that maybe the reason why we couldn't go get the ice cream cone is because mom and dad were concerned about paying the rent. Could be that maybe we can't go to Disney World because we need to eat this week. Could be that maybe we don't have the finest clothes that everybody else has because, well, we just couldn't fit into the budget this year. Sorry. Y'all?
Another lesson I can pretty much bring it in as you're saying. See how Job started the whole situation. He started it very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Sticking to Him and His God only. Now he got to a point, then Job, what I'm trying to say is about us. Now he gets to a point, then Job kind of listening to all this is going on, trying to figure it out in his mind. Mm-hmm. Then it's turning him away from his good things that he knows. So that's why he gets to a point, now he wants to ask God, why this, why that, because of all that, his friends, why put it into him. And of course, all this sarcasm is the influence of Satan. However, what Job did, it takes me back to Ephesians 6:12. That, for our struggles, we're not struggling, against flesh and blood and all that. Because we can see how God is protecting Job and how Satan is trying to, bring Job out of God's protection. So the world that we live in as Christians, we should be aware of what is going on around us. Job's story really tells me that when I am around, I should be very careful and make sure that I know my surroundings. So.
Yeah. I hear every once in a while on TV an interview with a parent, a wealthy celebrity parent, who has chosen, even though they certainly could afford it, to not get housekeepers to clean the house. It's the kid's job. And I'm not necessarily saying that these are all necessarily things that you need to practice. I'm just simply saying, I just kind of have some admiration that sometimes they decided, I'm not going to What I put in my will is that all of my money is going to go to whatever their charitable foundation happens to be. I'm not leaving anything behind for the kids. And of course, the interviewer is always asking, well, why? And what do you suppose the answer sometimes is? I want them to be able to make it on their own. I want them to know what it's like to work for a living. I want them to know what it's like to have something to be proud of that you did. You weren't just riding on my back or whatever else. Now, do you suppose those celebrities don't love their children? I suspect they do. But I suspect the reason they're doing it is because they know their kids. And they know what they're tempted to be like. And what they're making the attempt to do is get them to not be that way. Yes, ma'am.
Well, going on with what he said about Satan, I think one of the points of Job is that God will allow Satan to bring about terrible things in our lives as a test of our faith.
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes it's a test of our faith. It's a lot. Here's the terrible truth about the book of Job. The answer of Job is very unsatisfying. It doesn't say, I want to know, don't you? I want to know exactly why this happened. Fill in the blank, whatever it is.
And God could easily have said, Satan did it.
He could have, but I have a hunch that God allowed it for more than just an I'm more powerful than you contest. Or I know better than you contest. This wasn't necessarily just a contest to say that Satan, you're wrong, I know Job well and he won't do this. I have a hunch there was a reason even beyond all of that. Because, well, okay. Where's the book of Job found? In the Bible. Who reads the book of Job? I'm sorry, who reads the Bible? Christians and people that are wanting to do the right thing. And what does Job teach you and me? Some really important things that maybe we never even thought about before because, well, we just never thought about the fact that God may know more than we do. So, maybe one of the reasons why God allowed all that stuff to happen is, guess what? For my benefit and yours. Because now I know more. Now the curtain has been drawn back and I get an opportunity to see just a little bit of what goes on in the spiritual realm so that I can have perhaps maybe a lot more faith in God and perhaps be more faithful or maybe be more virtuous or be more righteous. Maybe I can have more perseverance when bad things happen. Because maybe I might be thinking to myself, and I think it's a perfectly valid thing to think, I wonder if maybe God said, or if Satan said, does Park fear God for nothing? He might have. And maybe that's some of the reason that God has allowed some bad things to happen. And I hope that if that happens to have been true, that I remain faithful nevertheless.
Yeah, if you do remain faithful and you get through it. And you can also share your testimony, your story with somebody else who's going through that same thing so you can relate to them.
Yeah.
And it also, you have to think of all the scripture, like you said, that is not necessarily me. It also said all things work together for those who, for good, for those who want the Lord, all the Lord whose purpose that. And we all know that we're going to be tempted and tested and go through trials. And you can just look at Paul and some of the other apostles who were good people and followed God, trying to bring the message, and they were
Terrible things
beheaded
happened to
or
them.
whatever, thrown in prison, do terrible things. So the equation, like you said, bad things don't happen to good people. It's just not only good things happen to good people. That's not true.
That's true.
But we can pray that please have mercy on me, and almost like let this pass like, let this trial or tribulation or whatever pass by as quickly,
Yeah.
and please let me.
Give me the strength to get through this one.
Get through, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Because I think you're right. You know, God, I think I made mention of this last time. In fact, I know I did because I was talking with Hugh about it a little bit later on. Hugh apparently plays with his grandson one of these 3D chess games, which kind of fits Hugh, right? You know, he's one of these kind of guys. But you know, I'm convinced that God doesn't have usually a singular reason why He lets something happen. God's much better than that. I imagine He probably has a number of reasons why it is that maybe some things are allowed. I know in my life personally, not only sometimes have the bad things that have happened in my life helped me to learn to be more patient and to endure, but like you were saying, there are times that I can share things out of my life with someone else when, I don't know, have you ever heard someone say, "You just don't know how I feel"? Well, maybe I do. Maybe I've gone through something like that. And you know, just speak from a counseling standpoint, you know, when you've got someone who's got this pain and you're able to kind of lay your pain up against it, sometimes that's very soothing. I'm not the only one suffering that way. You do understand how I feel. And that can be really very useful. Charles and then...
Well, we're all tested. We've been tested throughout time. Job was tested, and of course he had a great test. But think of the example he was to everybody who knew him and saw how he suffered and how he stayed faithful and true to God.
Mm-hmm.
Just as we can do the same thing as we're tested, and people looking at us and seeing how we're responding to it.
Yeah, exactly. Philosophically speaking, even atheists, as I've got on the slide back here, will concede that some pain is actually good. For example, sticking a baby with a needle, which is painful, to deliver life-saving medicine, well, that's good. Baby doesn't think so at the time, did they? They're screaming bloody murder. Therefore, they will often talk, sometimes, at least atheists will, about pointless evil, an evil that I can't explain. But here's a rather interesting quote I ran across that I really do like. This reasoning is, of course, fallacious. It's false. Just because you can't see or imagine a good reason why God might allow something to happen doesn't mean there can't be one. Do you follow what he's saying there? Just because you can't think of one doesn't mean that one doesn't exist. Again, we see lurking within supposedly hard-nosed skepticism an enormous faith in one's own cognitive facility or faculties. I'm smarter than God, and so I can figure it all out. And God, you got it wrong. If our minds can't plumb the depths of the universe for good answers to suffering, well then, there can't be any. Well, this is blind faith of a high order. It's just saying, I am so much smarter than God. And there is no good reason for this. Doug?
It is 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The things that happened to the children of Israel were happening to be examples for us. This is also the verse that says we will not be tempted above that which we are able.
Mm-hmm.
But with the temptation would be given the ability to overcome it. But that is, just like the point that you're making here, that's up to God.
Right.
He knows better than we what we can withstand.
Exactly.
Rather than to think, oh, that's more than I can bear. No, that standard is God's standard.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that because, we go through some tough stuff.
And sometimes it is that when we reach the point where we think, I just can't take anymore, maybe instead of having a pity party for ourselves, maybe we ought to say, God thinks I can do this. Sometimes God has more confidence in us than we have in ourselves.
But doesn't that raise our faith to a new level?
It should. And I think that's part of the test, as it were. I think that's part of the reason or rationale behind it, is that God's not doing all this stuff just because he can be cruel. any more than our parents made us make our beds up, or vacuum the floor, or mow the grass, or wash the dishes, or what. They're not doing it to be cruel. They're not doing it to be selfish. They're doing it so that we can learn, we can grow stronger, we can know how to do stuff. I used to kick dirt that my mom would try to make me cook. And I wondered, why do you want to make me cook? Okay, I was a chauvinist back in those days. I'll get married. My wife will do the cooking. But you know what? I'm really glad she did. I'd be starving Marvin otherwise, okay? I didn't know that back then. I know that now. So, you know, it really is important, I think, for us to keep in mind that these things aren't to punish us. And God is so much smarter than we are. And just because it is that we can't think of a good reason why doesn't mean there isn't a good reason. And maybe it is that we just need to, I hate to use this phrase for people that are adults, but maybe we just need to grow up sometimes, spiritually speaking. And just go ahead and say, well, I'm not sure what's going on. But I know God does. And I know, and boy, here's a really important point. Does God love you? Are you sure about that? Tell me how you can know that.
John 3:16.
Which says,
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that who should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
here's the proof. God gave his only Son to die for us. Or about Romans chapter 5, where it's talking about how it is that,
Verse 8.
yeah, about how it is that people wouldn't die for just a good man.
Yeah.
But God shows his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. How much more does he have to, let's be honest, sometimes we're so much like the Israelites. How many miracles did the Israelites see in the wilderness? How many times did they doubt him? Over and over and over and over again. Does God love us? Well, yeah. We say in kind of a cracked voice, yeah. How many times does he have to prove it? How many blessings does he have to throw into our laps? How much does God have to pay to get us into heaven? How much has he
The
paid?
ultimate price.
Exactly. And my point very simply is this. If I can know that God loves me, if I can trust his love for me, then I may not understand everything bad that's going on, but I can trust that love. Like I can trust the love of my good parents who didn't make me do things they didn't want to do because they hated me. It's because they loved me. And they wanted something better for me. Y'all?
I want to add something to what you just said. If we are really faithful Christians, that we know we are following Jesus Christ, I think such things, sometimes when things like that come to us, that we know that this is really not from us, because sometimes we can bring bad things to ourselves. But if indeed we, out of all that bad things that's coming to ourselves, I think we should look at 2 Timothy 3:12. That, if we really want to be godly people, then we should be happy that whatever comes to our way is persecution.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, my word. I apologize. Is it really 10 minutes after?
Preach on, brother.
Well, there's one last thing that we wanted to get to, but we'll get to it next week. So I'm going to shift over from Bible class mode to devotional mode. But I'm just going to kind of jump off of what I was just talking about a moment ago. Is there absolutely any doubt in anyone's mind that the Lord loves us? There should not be, by any stretch of the imagination, in anyone's imagination. As a consequence, do not turn away from the God who loved you that much. If it is this evening that you have never become a Christian, we urge you to become a Christian. Don't turn to, of all the songs that are sad out there, some of the saddest songs are all about unrequited love, unreturned love. They're sad songs. And most assuredly, can you imagine being God who loved us so much that he gave his only Son, and to have us say, no thanks. And if it happens to be this evening that you are a Christian, but maybe in thinking about some of these things this evening, you know that you need to turn your life back over to the Lord. Well, we encourage you to do that this evening. You can do that where you sit by repenting, determining to do better. But if you'd like for us to be praying for you, we certainly encourage you to ask for those prayers, and you can do that now. And you can also respond to the gospel to be baptized this evening. If you have that need, we encourage you to come forward while we stand and sing.
Hear the